The world is drowning in massive debt. But this is neither a calculation error nor an accident. Over the years, debt has increased, yet the narrative has never changed. Governments made wrong decisions, politicians were incompetent, banks failed to restrain their greed. In other words, we were told that debt was not a choice, but an accident, a loss of control. But the numbers, the data, and the system itself tell us that this is not how it actually happened. And when we examine history closely, we see a shocking truth. This system was designed around debt. And in this system, debt is not a tool. It is the core fuel of the order itself. Welcome to Code 404, Economy, where the historical codes of money are revealed. The truth is always hidden in the details. Today, global debt stands at around $350 trillion, more than 3 times the total output of the world economy. In other words, the world has consumed far more than it has produced. And this gap is being filled through borrowing. So how did this happen? How did humanity normalize debt and borrowing? The answer is simple, yet unsettling. Because the mechanism was designed this way, and the system works exactly as intended. Historically, debt was usually an extraordinary condition. It was used when a war broke out, when a major disaster occurred, or when the treasury experienced temporary distress. Debt was not a goal. It was not a permanent way of life. It was merely a bridge. But today, debt is no longer a bridge. It is the norm of life. To buy a home, for education and healthcare, to run governments, to keep companies alive, debt is always the first option. Almost no one is left who does not use credit or live with debt. And no one asks the obvious question, how did this massive debt spiral become normal? The answer to this question takes us back to a point we discussed in a previous video, 1971, the day money lost its reality. When money was detached from gold, it wasn't only money that changed. Our culture changed, our relationship with debt evolved. When gold existed, debt was dangerous. Once gold was removed, borrowing became easier. Under the gold standard, obtaining credit was difficult, because there was a limit. If governments borrowed too much, they would run out of gold. If banks expanded credit excessively, they could not back it. The system naturally restrained debt. But when this barrier was removed, everything changed and balances collapsed. After 1971, money became unlimited. And once money became unlimited, debt became boundless. The question was no longer, can we pay this debt? The question became, how can we roll this debt over? This seemingly small nuance changed everything. Debt was no longer eliminated, it was postponed. Existing debt was covered with new debt, maturities were extended, interest was adjusted, numbers were manipulated. In this system, debt does not need to be paid off. The only requirement is that the wheel keeps turning. And at this exact point, debt stopped being a problem and became the engine of the system. Look at the crises we have experienced in recent times. After every crisis, the solution has always been the same: more debt. When the 2008 housing crisis hit, when the pandemic arrived, when economies slowed down, isn't this a contradiction? If debt is the problem, why is debt always used as the solution? Because in this design system, debt is not a malfunction. It is a solution, at least in the short term. Now let's go deeper into the mechanics of the game. Who creates all this debt? Most people think that money is only printed by governments. But in this system, most money is created by banks. How? By issuing loans. When you take out a loan from a bank, the bank does not give you existing money from its vault. A number is entered on a screen, and new money is created. That number becomes real money within the system. But this money can only enter the system under one condition: as debt. In the modern monetary system, money equals debt. This is a critical point, because if money exists as debt, if debt does not grow, money cannot grow either. In this system, the economy depends on debt to grow. That is why, during downturns, credit channels are opened, central banks lower interest rates, because if the flow of debt stops, the system freezes. This is precisely why debt is not a mistake. It is part of the design. The system collapses the moment it can no longer produce debt. Now let's look at countries. Why are governments so heavily indebted? Because debt is the easiest and least painful solution for governments. If taxes are increased, people react. If spending is cut, the economy slows. But if you borrow, no one pays a price today. The cost is postponed. The bill is sent to the future, and the future has no right to choose. That is why debt is the perfect tool for governments. It removes the problem from today and throws it into tomorrow. And when the current government's term ends, dealing with it becomes someone else's problem. So who buys this debt? This is where bonds come in. Government bonds are the cornerstone of this system. But here is the interesting part. These bonds are often bought by central banks. So the government borrows, the central bank buys that debt, and creates new money in return. This is indirect money printing. Over the last 20 years, this mechanism has reached unimaginable levels. After 2008, central banks implemented extraordinary measures. They called it quantitative easing. Behind this technical term was a simple truth: creating money by buying debt. It was supposed to be temporary, at least that's what they said. But it became permanent, just like in 1971. Now let's ask the question more clearly. Why was this system built this way? The answer is hidden here. Debt keeps the system alive. Thanks to debt, consumption continues, growth persists, unemployment is postponed, collapse is delayed. But every delay comes with a cost. As debt grows, the system becomes more fragile. A small shock can now cause massive damage. If interest rates rise even slightly, debt becomes unmanageable. If growth slows even a little, bankruptcies follow. That's why the system constantly demands low interest rates, constant liquidity, like an addicted body. There's a critical threshold here. At first, debt supports growth, but at some point, debt exists only to pay old debt. That is the moment the system starts consuming itself. Beyond this stage, debt is no longer productive. It exists only for survival. And the harsh truth is this: this is exactly where the world stands today. So why does debt never end? Because in this system, the end of debt means the death of the system itself. The core problem is this: the money in the system exists only as principal. But interest is never created. Technically, it is impossible for everyone to repay their debts, including interest. That is why debt is not designed to be eliminated, but to be sustained. When a debt is paid off, the system does not relax. On the contrary, that amount of money disappears from the system. Therefore, when one debt ends, a new debt must immediately be created. Now let's ask the real question. Who wins in this system? Because if everyone were losing, this order would have collapsed long ago. The first winners: governments. Through debt, governments can continue spending without raising taxes. They can keep voters satisfied and pass the bill to the future. Debt is politically invisible. It doesn't hurt like taxes. But sooner or later, it is paid. Only who pays and when is unclear. The second winning group: the financial sector. For banks, debt is a commercial product. When they issue loans, they create new money, earn interest on it, and when risks materialize, governments often step in. Profits are private, but losses are socialized. 2008 is the clearest example of this. Banks were rescued, but people lost their homes. The third winning group: asset owners. A debt-based system inflates asset prices. Because while money not backed by real value keeps increasing, real assets are limited. Land is limited, housing is limited, shares are limited. As money increases, the prices of these assets rise. That is why those who own homes, stocks, and have access to debt are on the winning side. But those living on fixed incomes cannot keep up. Now let's look at the losers, the silent victims of the system. The first losing group: savers. Inflation is a hidden tax. No one says you're paying taxes, but your money buys less over time. In this system, saving is punished while borrowing is rewarded. Because debt erodes with inflation, but savings lose value. This is an inverted ethical system. The second losing group: younger generations. Because debt is a bill sent to the future. Today's spending is paid with tomorrow's labor and income. Young generations did not make these decisions. They hadn't voted yet. They weren't even working. Yet they are the ones who will pay the debt. That's why young people start life more indebted, own property later, and accumulate fewer assets. This is not a coincidence. It is one of the system's harsh realities. The third losing group: those outside the system, those without access to debt. The system rewards those with access to debt, but is ruthless to those without it. As asset prices rise, they remain on the sidelines. Income inequality grows, and this inequality fuels social tension. Now let's ask the hardest question. How does the system end? Because history whispers to us, systems that grow on debt eventually reach their limits. When we follow the historical codes, we see three possible endings. First, inflation. Debt is evaporated through inflation. Money is printed, value declines, debts are paid numerically, but purchasing power is destroyed. This is the quietest collapse, and also the most unjust. Second, default debts are not paid. States or corporations declare bankruptcy, banks take losses. It is sudden and painful, but sometimes it is the only way out. Third, reset debts are restructured, currencies are transformed, rules are rewritten, a new system is built. 1944 was such a moment, 1971 was such a moment, and it is likely to happen again. Today, many people think the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, but resets have happened many times throughout history. Right now, the world stands in the middle of these three possibilities. Inflation exists. Debt levels are at historic extremes. Central banks are trapped. If they raise interest rates, debts cannot be rolled over. If they lower interest rates, inflation spirals out of control. This is a deadlock. That's why the system constantly tries to buy time. Every new package, every new stimulus, every new intervention, all aim to gain a little more time. This is not a solution. It is merely postponement. And every postponement makes the burden heavier. What is clear is this: the system is not infinite. This is not an opinion. It is a lesson from history. So what can we do as individuals to protect ourselves? First, we must stay away from false solutions. The idea that one single instrument solves everything is wrong. Gold alone is not the cure. Crypto alone is not the solution. Real estate alone is not the answer. The solution lies in awareness. If you understand the system and are aware of what may happen, you don't panic, you don't blindly believe promises, you diversify risks, and most importantly, you don't fall for empty narratives. But if we fail to understand the system, we will be forced to live with its consequences. History shows us this clearly. Orders built on debt eventually confront that debt. This is not a prophecy. It is a recurrence. History is never kind to those who are unprepared. And perhaps the most vital question is this: at the next reset moment, will we be prepared? Or will we once again ask, how did this happen? If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe. The answers are hidden in history's codes. We reveal them.